This is not a video that relies on Player Core 2, but I wanted to see what changes they were going to make to Alchemist and Oracle before I made this one, because I want to touch on every single class and describe how you can reflavor them to make a different character concept come to life than the one they normally suggest. The actual inspiration for this video was from a lot of people saying they don't feel like they can make a compelling character without free archetype, because you don't have enough customization with just class alone, and I think that keeping like most of the flavor text completely the same, you can yoink and twist these classes enough to the point where you get very radically different characters. And you can still splash into an archetype a little bit to get that last little nudge mechanically in order to get them to where you want to go. And you should think of this as a flavor-first guide on how to build a character, where I'm going to describe the flavor text of each class, and then go into detail on what kinds of things you would expect to do, and a twist that you could do on each of these classes that brings them just a little bit outside of the normal mold. So to start, we have the Alchemist. And whatever you do with Alchemist, it's going to be you're somebody that makes a bunch of items and has high intelligence. From there, it's basically up to you what that means flavor-wise. The game does not state, oh, you must be a chemistry master with glass vials. No. You can be somebody who just picks a bunch of random stuff off the ground and believes hard enough to crush them into powders and stuff that you then chew on to be your mutagens or something like that. You can do basically anything with Alchemist as long as it relies on generating a bunch of items, because that's what Alchemist is all about. It's about the item generation. So any character that would theoretically use a bunch of weird magical items that they're constantly consuming or throwing or using poisons or anything like that, Alchemist would be a great flavor fit. Next, we have the Barbarian. Classic, get angry, hit stuff hard character, simple to play, grr, big type deal. And that's reasonable. Barbarian is a class that focuses hard on you hit stuff big with weapon. But without doing any archetyping, if you just think of Rage as hyper-focus in combat so you don't do any concentrate actions, it also fully works. So you can have a Barbarian that is still intelligent enough, but doesn't quite think with their head once the adrenaline starts pumping. And you don't need to go for like this tribal type Barbarian. You can still have like a soldier who, as soon as they're in a fight, they think about nothing else except getting the opponent dead. And that's an interesting character. And it's directly supported by Barbarian's mechanics still, being eternally driven to just keep on pushing through things. But it now is not about a primordial rage coursing through you, but about some kind of deeper training or something else that makes you compelled to fight and hurt. Bards are thought of as traditionally just like performer people that sometimes have a rapier, and that's kind of it. But they don't have to be that way. They have proficiency in all the martial weapons, and they only have like a couple subclasses that actually like require performance for specialized things. So you could just avoid those subclasses, and then a lot of Bard's kit starts to make sense as like an occultist that's learning magic with their weird spellbook feats. You can pull them in a bunch of different interesting directions because fundamentally they are a spellcaster who uses charisma and have some cool actions that affect the entire board. And that's it for Bard. Like, they have that. You can also build them in the more warrior style, where you take a general feat or an archetype for some armor, champion dedication, sentinel, or anything else to get into those medium armors. And you can build a strength Bard pretty convincingly and start using stuff like polearms and have a reach weapon attacking Bard as like an assault type character that you can just make a lot of value from. So Bard is mechanically versatile, but even if you do want to play the traditional like backline caster type approach, you don't necessarily need to be the performer in order to be a Bard. And then Champion. Champion, there's a lot of different nuance in where you can twist it depending on what god you have. You are always going to end up following some kind of god or some kind of other deity stat block, pantheon or whatever. But with Champion, you can go and get the range weapons. You can do other things with it. You are always going to be trying to use your champion reaction as much as possible, but from there, it's pretty open in what you're going to do. All that champion has in terms of class features you need to justify is above average armor defensive progression, a little bit of healing, or its shield focus spell that just got, and the champion reaction, but a lot of those can be justified in other ways, and if your GM is fine with changing flavor text, you can play like a leader protector character and kind of scrub out a lot of the religious themes. The character just happens to be trained in religion, but it's not a big part of like their identity as a person or whatever. And then you have a pretty clean tank character, and anybody that would want to protect somebody or be defensive for any reason can then fit nicely into champion's niche. You do need to do more significant reflavoring because you're shifting away from the deity. Cleric has a similar type of shifting away from the deity and making that maybe a little bit less of what you think of when you look at clerics. And after you do that, you're fundamentally a wisdom caster with a lot of healing. And that can be just about anything, so your traditional white mage characters still fit in cleric. It doesn't necessarily need to always be that you are the god's #1 chosen follower, because you can reflavor that to be something else. Mechanically, you'll still need to follow the Edict's Anathema, but if you have a personal code of ethics and you want to heal people, cleric can do that. You just pick a deity that is usually about healing people, and it becomes pretty good. And then Druid. It fundamentally is a caster with some nature-themed focus spells depending on the subclass, just generally, and the primal spell list. So just about any way you could take a casting character that has damage and healing can be done with a Druid. You get medium armor, so again, you can build it like a soldier Druid combat mage who's trained in healing, fighting, and blasting with magic, and that's like a reasonable character you can build from Druid's core mechanics. You get medium armor, and you can wear metal armor now due to the remaster and metal being an element, so you can build a Druid that is thematically about its armor, about going in with some kind of weapon because you took some archetype, maybe Mauler to get the scaling proficiency and some two-handed weapon, or you're going in for something like Bastion. Bastion's the name of the one that gives you the shield block and all that stuff, so you can play a defensively oriented soldiery Druid by taking just like one archetype feat and splashing in that flavor that way. But even just baseline Druid, you're an armored caster, and you can take that in whatever direction you want. You will still need to follow some Edicts and Anathema from like Druid itself, but you can still take that in a lot of different directions. And speaking of taking stuff in a lot of different directions, a fighter. If you are a character that uses a weapon, you can be a fighter. All that fighter defines for you is that you're brave, you fight well, and you have good armor, probably. Like, that's kinda it. You're just good at using weaponry. And you can then take the good at using weaponry, if you want to, use an archetype to splash on a little bit of healing, splash on a little bit of magic, do whatever you want to do. If your character is fundamentally just a normal warrior, fighter can do any normal warrior super convincingly. But mechanically, if you want to use a gun or a reloading weapon, you're probably better off picking Gunslinger, which is like a more specific kind of fighter mechanically. They both have a similar gimmick of having bonus accuracy. But Gunslinger is all about, I'm using a gun or a crossbow to great effect. So again, any weapon user that is using a gun or a crossbow will be great as a gunslinger. Then you have Gunslinger's pal, the Inventor, which is all about crafting, making interesting things. So you can do the kind of kooky, crazed inventor type person who's pushing all their stuff to the limit. Sometimes it explodes, like the base flavor of the book. Or you can build the more controlled type of person who is making their gadget, trying to refine it over time, and it keeps on blowing back on them, because that is also an appealing character. So you can think of Inventor in those different ways. The uncommon classes and the classes that get a bit weirder flavor-wise will be harder for you to nudge into different areas. Inventor is one of those. But if you can come up with an interesting reason for you to have a custom weapon, custom armor, or some kind of robotic companion, you have an interesting inventor that will be mechanically supported by the text of the rules. Then you have the Investigator. It's really hard to nudge Investigator around because it's very clearly just somebody that has to look after a bunch of different mysteries and hunts down the answers. But you can build any type of detective. You're still going to be basically building a detective. Your motives or anything else, very up in the air, but Investigator is, I'd say, the hardest class to find a different, style and niche for. Moving into Kineticist, a class which already has a lot of build variety inside of itself based on what elements you are picking. So, Kineticist, if you're picking fire, you're tending to be a ranged attacker that does a lot of reflex save type abilities. If you're picking something like water, you might be a support that has some movement denial. And if you can justify those magical abilities, you can do any flavor text you want surrounding it. I don't think you need to constrict yourself to just the elemental planes, as long as you can justify, I have an ability to do this. It will be fine. So, if I were to build a Kineticist and I wanted to, again, let's say I wanted to talk about me being a combat mage, I'd take I am a pyromancer, I have fire magic, and I have some light armor that I run around in, so I can blast people with fire. And you can do that with Kineticist and just play a generic blaster character that way. Or you can take it and say, well, I'm going to flavor all my blasts to be different energy bolts, and I'm going to take a lot of the air and metal feats to then do lightning attacks a lot, and I'm going to be a lightning mage. And so if you want to do a damage mage based on an elemental type, Kineticist can get you there really easily, and you don't necessarily need to lean into the flavor of all my magic comes from an elemental plane. Magus is a spell sword. Anybody that would have a reason to have a sword and magic can be a Magus. So you can nudge it in a lot of different directions. You're still going to want to have a good amount of intelligence, because I think that you get a lot of variety from the cantrips that Magus provides, and I think that you should be at least considering throwing in an area of effect spell into your prepared spell slots every now and again. But you don't lose everything for dumping your int a bit and going into a different mental stat. You can even archetype into something else. You can still have magical blasting of some kind. And Magus will still be functional, because primarily when you're attacking with spells, you're doing it with a spell strike, which only cares about your weapon accuracy. So Magus can actually be pretty good without that much int, especially post-remaster, now that cantrips don't call upon int for its damage. So you can build Magus in a lot of different ways, similar to how you'd build a fighter in a lot of different ways. It's just a little bit more narrow because now you have some magic that you need to explain your character concept. Monks, I convincingly think in this system, are actually way more versatile than people give them credit for. Any type of street artist or martial artist that has a slight defensive slant can be a monk. And a lot of people get very wrapped into, well, I want to have that mysticism flavor, I want to have, the martial arts stance, I want to be trained in a monastery for a long time, and all that kind of thing. But what's stopping you from saying you're a street brawler who had to learn how to protect themselves, and so you trained your body as a weapon due to that, and you still get into scraps all the time? And so you kinda have this Pugless type character where you're just solving problems by punching them in the face. Monk is a character that is, or as a class, is defined by moving fast, punching fast. So if you have a character or a character concept that involves moving and punching, Monk can get you there. And if you want to lean away from the mysticism, simply don't take the monk focus spells or describe them as, I don't know what's happening, / it's just a big adrenaline rush. Oracle is one of the reasons I delayed this video until I got Player Core 2. And it's because I wanted to see how Oracle was reworked. And new Oracle can basically do the have some kind of curse, but I still have magical outpourings that I can blast around and do cool stuff with. And depending on the type of Oracle, that describes like what toll is taken on your body after you do your big effects. So I think those big effects are very worth using, and I think that Oracle is probably overtuned in a balance spot if the 4 slots per level was not a misprint. So Oracle is a very powerful class that then has this drawback of a curse they need to grapple with, and you then have this interesting character where you're trying to figure out how much do I want to lean into my curse for power now, and you can have a lot of angst around that. Psychic can have a very similar amount of angst, but a lot of its issues per encounter are on a smaller scale because you're unleashing to get a lot of power temporarily, and then you fall back down to normal with a little bit of stupefied condition, so you're less efficient at spells. And Psychic also has some of the strongest focus spell activities in the game, so Psychic is still pretty good at going into those types of character concepts, and particularly if you don't want to have a divine list, Psychic can then be the rest of those curse-bound type characters. With Rangers, they basically have their mechanics all centered around, you point at one guy, you can track them down to the ends of the earth, and then you'll get bonuses at fighting them. And so anybody that tracks people and wants to fight that specific person will get good use out of Rangers' mechanics as storytelling. So bounty hunters are actually a great reason, or like a great archetype for Ranger. Not the bounty hunter archetype itself, but like the idea of a bounty hunter character fits really well with Ranger's class identity of tracking stuff down and killing it, or taking it in, or whatever have you. So Rangers can be built also as characters are just really driven once they decide to do something. You pick one person out there and you say, I will kill you. And for any government agents watching, that was a joke. I'm just describing what a Ranger would say. That is not me saying it. But any character that would reasonably say stuff like that and wants to put mechanics behind it, Ranger as a class does that. You don't need to lean into the connection to the wilds if you don't want to. With something like Rogue, as long as you are a character who is fine with stabbing people while they are off guard, and you find some way to get them off guard, you can build just about anything as a Rogue. And for those of you that have been following Ron's YouTubers Try Pathfinder series, for the little bit that we were playing Outlaws Valkenstar, I was actually playing a ruffian rogue who was also a doctor at one point and also a craftsman, then also, because rogues had so many skills, I could then mechanically justify this really wacko character that just had a bunch of jobs that he was jumping between. So Rogue mechanically is a character with a lot of skills that is really good at hitting people when they are off guard. So you can do really anything with that. It doesn't need to be, ooh, I'm a criminal against the law. It can be so much more. Because it's just anybody who fights with underhanded tactics and has a lot of useful skills can be a rogue. And I think Rogue is probably my pick for one of the most versatile classes in the system, second only to Fighter. And Fighter is just simply anybody with a weapon, so Rogue, great pick. Sorcerer is my pick for like what I would give out as the generic mage. If you just want to be the classic mage of any variety, because you can pick any spell list, Sorcerer will get you there. In the remaster, it has the deadly sorcery ability now kind of built in, where all of your healing and damage spells from slots now get a bonus, so sorcerers make a really good blaster, burst healer type character if you take those types of abilities. And you can have your power source be from a lot of different options. So there's a lot of different ways you can then take that sorcerer in your power source, and you can then reflavor any of those power sources as long as the mechanics kind of line up. Like Phoenix is anything with fire and healing. So if you want to play like a pyromancer who channels the flames of life, there you go. That might not be a mind-blowing thing of, oh, the mage can be any type of mage. Magical abilities can be reflavored, but like, that's a way to do it. Summoners, I'd say, are constrained because the entire reason to pick them is you have a best friend that you summon and fights with you. So you can be a kid with their imaginary best friend. You could have an otherworldly spirit haunting you, and you summon in the haunted spirit to fight for you. And anything that would reasonably have a companion that is somewhat otherworldly that follows you around can fit as a summoner. So it's pretty open in flavor-wise as long as you want to have that companion. And if you don't want to have that companion, we are now talking about a sorcerer. So take your pick there. And now we're going to get into a couple of the characters I'm going to call weird fighters, which are the Swashbuckler and the Thaumaturge. So Swashbuckler is traditionally all about the I'm going to style on my opponents as hard as possible, do my flashy finishers, and keep on dancing around the battlefield and making everybody else look like a fool but me. Now in the remaster, they'll actually be able to do that instead of looking like a fool, failing to tumble through 3 times in a row. So Swashbucklers, as long as you are a character that is a bit of a show-off, a bit of a braggart, if you will, and wants to prove to the world that they are great, maybe they have a little of an attention issue, Swashbuckler can fit that character concept because they're constantly trying to show off in their mechanics. Any character with any reason to show off as a warrior character makes sense as Swashbuckler. Now, Swashbuckler does have key stat dexterity and never gets the option of key stat strength, so you're gonna want to still use like the finesse weaponry, but that isn't necessarily that much of a restriction if you want to play that show-offy duelist character. It does mean that you aren't gonna really play a Great Axe Swashbuckler or something like that, and if you want to play that type of bragging Great Axe character, maybe a champion where you have one of those reactions that protects yourself, like the Selfish Shield or whatever, may be best because then you can show off that egotistical side of the character mechanically that way. Thaumaturge by default is an occultist that has gathered a lot of knowledge and has some weird artifacts that only they know how to use. But what if they were just actually a little bit loose in the head, and they had just like all these objects that have mystic power because they have an innate mystic power they can't quite control. They don't quite understand what their visions are, so that's why they have all the dubious knowledge stuff and the knowledge that they shouldn't really have. And their magic sometimes just works in strange ways as is like a traditionally a fightery character because they can't understand it. It can't be explained. Any character that has magical powers that they can't really explain works great as a Thaumaturge if those magical powers are small. Otherwise, I'd say Psychic or Oracle works good if you want to play a castery side of the I don't know what my powers are doing. Which, any character that has a patron and doesn't mind having a little thing follow them around that keeps an eye on them from their overlord will work as a witch. And the exact power source that you get from is versatile, depending on the subclass. You can reflavor stuff mechanically, so a witch can be somebody that delivers a bunch of curses and then resentment lingers them for all the fight. Or you can build a character that is maybe trying to keep everybody alive, and so you're taking like Lesson of Life and trying to get into all this healing magic, and there's then like this cost you can roleplay through as like a healing witch. And I think there's a lot of roleplay potential there, and that's not a thing you'd usually see from the witch class. And finally, we have Wizard. Now, Wizard's Arcane School says where you studied to learn these magical abilities. I think Wizard very much fits the I am a studied magic person very well. And I think that with the new Arcane Schools, it makes a lot more sense as a magical studied person. And if you want to just be a magical person with intelligence, Wizard will get you there. And any type of magical person you want will fit as a wizard. And again, if these ideas were not enough to give you like concepts of what you want to do, I'd say you can still splash in a little bit from an archetype here or there and still make the character your own. I just don't buy into that free archetype is needed in order to make interesting characters in this system, because this system is already interesting enough on its own. And, well, I'm going to leave it off there. I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.